Before courtrooms, before lawyers, before the concept of human rights even existed, there was punishment. And punishment in the medieval world was not about justice. It was about fear.
It was about making sure that every single person who watched would never, ever forget. What you're about to hear are not legends, not myths, not exaggerations. These are documented methods of execution used on real human beings by real governments in front of real crowds.
And some of them are so disturbing, historians still debate whether we should teach them at all. This is Drawn and Buried, and today we are going all the way in. To understand medieval execution, you have to understand one thing first.
Death was not the point. Pain was the point. Humiliation was the point. The message was the point. Medieval rulers did not have police forces.
What they had was spectacle. Public execution was, and this sounds horrifying because it is, entertainment. Crowds gathered. Children attended. Food was sold. The more brutal the execution, the louder the message to anyone watching. So when we look at these methods, we have to understand every single one of them was designed, calculated, purposeful.
This was not random cruelty. This was a system, and here is how it worked. Number 1. Hung, drawn, and quartered. If you were convicted of high treason in medieval England, this was your fate, and it did not happen fast. First, you were tied to a wooden frame called a hurdle, and you were dragged through the streets behind a horse, through mud, through crowds throwing things at you, through your own city which had already decided you were dead. Then you were hanged. But not until you were dead, until you were almost dead. They would cut you down while you were still conscious. Then, and this is where it becomes almost impossible to describe, they would open your abdomen, remove your organs, burn them in front of you while you watched, then beheading. Then your body was cut into 4 pieces, your head displayed on a spike, usually on London Bridge, as a warning to every single person who passed underneath it. This was not rare. This was not reserved for the worst criminals.
William Wallace, the Scottish hero you probably know from Braveheart, died this way, in 1305, in public, in front of a crowd. The last time this sentence was formally passed in England was 1782. Think about that.
Number 2. The breaking wheel, also called the Catherine wheel. This one was used across Europe for centuries. France, Germany, Russia, Scandinavia.
It was everywhere, because it worked, as a warning. Here is what happened. The condemned was tied spread eagle across a large wooden wheel, sometimes face up, sometimes face down.
Then a large iron hammer, or a heavy iron-rimmed wagon wheel. The executioner would begin breaking bones, methodically, starting from the extremities, working inward. Legs first, then arms, then, if you were lucky, the chest, which was mercy, because that ended it. If you were not lucky, the executioner had instructions to avoid the chest, to keep you alive as long as possible. People survived on the wheel for days. The most disturbing part, crowds would cheer for specific blows, like a sport. One French execution record from 1721 documents a man surviving on the wheel for 4 hours, conscious, before finally dying. 4 hours, and people watched the entire time. Number 3. Death by rats. This one does not have an official name because the people who used it did not want records of it.
Here is what we know from historical accounts. A prisoner was restrained, completely immobile. A metal bucket containing live rats was placed on their abdomen or chest. The bucket was then heated from the outside. The rats, desperate to escape the heat, had only one way out:
through the prisoner. Now, historians debate how widespread this method actually was. Some argue it was used more as a threat than an actual execution method, that the psychological terror of it was the real weapon.
But accounts from the Mongol Empire, from certain medieval European dungeons, from Chinese imperial courts, all describe variations of this method. Whether it was used once or 1,000 times, the fact that human beings designed it, that someone sat down and thought this up, that alone tells you something about what power does to people.
Number 4. Scaphism, also called the boats. This is perhaps the single most prolonged method of execution ever recorded in human history. It comes from ancient Persia, documented by the Greek historian Plutarch.
And it is without question the one that stays with you longest after you hear it. Here is what happened. The condemned was stripped, then placed between two boats that fit together like a shell. Holes were cut for the head, hands, and feet, which were left exposed. Then the prisoner was force-fed milk and honey until they developed severe diarrhea. The mixture was also applied to their exposed skin.
Then the boat was set adrift on a stagnant pond or swamp. The combination of bodily waste and the honey attracted insects, which began to breed inside the boat, on the exposed skin, in every wound.
The prisoner was kept alive, force-fed daily to prolong the process. The recorded case of Mithridates, a Persian soldier, documented him surviving this way for 17 days. 17 days. This is not myth, this is in the historical record. And once you know about it, you do not forget it. Number 5. Being buried alive. Of everything on this list, this one requires the least description, because every single person watching this already knows exactly why it is terrifying.
In medieval Europe, being buried alive was used as a legal punishment in certain regions, particularly for women convicted of infanticide or adultery in parts of Germany and Scandinavia. They were placed in a coffin, nailed shut, lowered into the ground.
Sometimes a small pipe was inserted into the coffin, giving the condemned access to air, not to save them, to extend how long they lasted. Forensic archaeologists have found medieval burial sites, skeletons with scratch marks on the inside of coffin lids, people who woke up in the dark, underground, and understood exactly what had happened to them. The average survival time researchers estimate was between 30 minutes and 2 hours. 2 hours of darkness. 2 hours of the air slowly running out. 2 hours of knowing that no one was coming. That is the one that keeps historians up at night. These were not the acts of monsters. That is the most important thing to understand. These were the acts of governments, of legal systems, of societies that looked at these methods and called them justice. The medieval world did not think of itself as cruel. It thought of itself as ordered, as civilized. And that, more than any individual execution on this list, is what should make you stop and think. Because every civilization in history has believed it was the reasonable one. Every single one. This has been Drawn in Bearing. If this is your first time here, subscribe.
because we are just getting started, and trust me, it gets darker from here.